Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and the San Francisco 49ers continue to have one of the best off seasons in the entire NFL. Things started off with getting George Kittle locked up on a brand new deal. Then a couple of days ago, it was signing Brock Purdy to a 5-year contract extension worth $265 million. And today, 3 days post Brock Purdy getting a brand new deal, the San Francisco 49ers have signed linebacker and perennial All-Pro Fred Warner to a 3-year, $63 million contract extension, essentially capping off what has been one of the best off seasons in San Francisco 49er history under the Shanahan and Lynch regime. We're going to get into all that stuff on top of that, including Brock Purdy getting a no-trade clause, and did San Francisco sign Jake Moody's eventual replacement this offseason? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe on the audio podcasting platforms. Give us that 5-star review, and let's break down Fred Warner signing a 3-year, $63 million contract extension with the San Francisco 49ers, and Kyle Chipto signing in here saying, what is there to discuss after this? And the answer is simply nothing. And that is one of the best things possible for the San Francisco 49ers, because after a long, grueling, tumultuous offseason last year with Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey and all the bad stuff that hung over their head post Super Bowl loss, they have set themselves up for the ultimate bounce back. Now, on the field play, that will maybe determine how the season ends up. However, the way this offseason has shaken out, 11 draft picks, re-signing 3 pillars of your franchise, 3 players every team would want on their team, and 3 players that ultimately are going to define this next window of San Francisco 49er play, capping things off with Fred Warner's new deal happening today. He does become the highest paid linebacker in the league. I believe he'll get around $21 million per year. That surpasses Roquan Smith's deal of $20 million per year. I don't know exactly how they're going to deal with the 2 years on his contract now and what that looks like when it comes to lowering his cap hit the next couple of years. However, the San Francisco 49ers have put themselves in a great position to have a great year this season, getting rid of all of the drama, all of the real BS that came with last offseason, putting it behind them. And we have seen this regime, this front office, kind of look at what happened last year and say, that's not going to happen again this offseason. It's too important of an offseason. You got the entire defense. You say goodbye to Deebo Samuel. You have some top of the line stars that have serious injury concerns, and having your Hall of Fame tight end, your Hall of Fame linebacker, and your franchise quarterback in the building from day one is going to hopefully jumpstart what can become a phenomenal San Francisco 49ers season. But Fred Warner gets 3 years. I believe it's going to be tacked on to the remaining 2 years of his current deal. So essentially, we're getting 5 more years of Fred Warner. The first 2 years of the extension erase the 2 void years currently on his contract. So essentially, you're erasing some void years, getting Fred under contract, and then getting 1 extra year of Fred, which is exactly what you want to do if you are San Francisco. And funny enough, this deal in a way mirrors Fred's initial 5-year, $95 million contract extension he got a couple years ago. This really is a brand new 5-year deal, right? It was a 3-year deal. So it was an initial 5-year deal. He's 3 years into it. They just tack on 3 more years and essentially give you another 5-year deal of Fred Warner. He also gets $56.7 million guaranteed. And if you look at the linebacker contracts on the market, that is going to be just under Roquan Smith's $60 million guaranteed. But if that is fully guaranteed money, it blows out of the water Roquan Smith's $45 million guaranteed. So a lot of great things happening for Fred Warner. But the bigger thing here is what this means for San Francisco, because we already talked about the BS that happened last year, but getting Warner locked up and loaded like Purdy and Kittle from day one is so important because you said goodbye to Dre Greenlaw this offseason, albeit they didn't want to. It happened, right? You have D. Winters, who is often injured. You hope he can become something in year number 3, but then you went and drafted Nicholas Martin as the second highest drafted linebacker in this regime's history, and you're hoping to pair him with Fred. And when you lose Hufanga and Greenlaw and Javarius Ward and Leonard Floyd and Malik Collins, and you gut your defensive line and you bring in a new but old defensive coordinator, right? You have this massive change come on your defense. You have to lock up Fred Warner. You have to have your stallions in your stable ready to go for race day, essentially, right? Week 1, you are banking on Fred Warner being a perennial All-Pro for you over the course of the next 5 years. I'm not too worried about the length of the contract, simply because linebackers can usually play into their mid-40s, or excuse me, mid-30s, not 40s. Fred Warner is about 28, 29 years old, so he'll be on San Francisco until he's about 33, 34 now, which will probably be when he retires, and you won't see much of a drop-off, I think. And also, kind of mirroring Kittle's deal, it locks up two of the most important players in this franchise's history of the last 10 years or so. It makes them lifelong 49ers. Those are important things to happen, especially with the big changes happening on defense. You have to have your leaders in your building, and we are now kind of getting a clearer picture as to what this new core looks like in San Francisco. Obviously, you have Brock Purdy, you have George Kittle, you have Fred Warner, you have Nick Bosa, and you have Diamador Lenore locked up as well. Those are 5 guys. If you want to count Brandon Ayuk, you can as well in that grouping, but I'm going to go ahead and call those first 5 guys the new core in San Francisco, where you lost a lot of great players over the past couple years. Keeping Fred Warner is so important to your team. And I think, with Fred, he is a captain for a reason. He's that green dot player that every defense wants. He's the best linebacker in football, bar none. It was funny. I was on X or Twitter right after the deal became official, and it was announced by Schefter and NFL Network. And one of the Philly reporters was talking about, what Zach Bond's contract looks like compared to Fred's and the output both those players had last year. And I'll read it off to you. Fred Warner is now getting $21 million per year. Zach Bond signed a big contract this offseason as well. He's getting $17 million a year. And Zach Bond's output was he played 20 games last year with Philadelphia, had 184 tackles, 79 stops, 13 tackles for losses, 6 quarterback hits, 3.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, 7 pass deflections, 6 forced fumbles, 75 passer rating allowed. But then you get to Fred Warner. He played just 17 games compared to 20, had 131 tackles, 53 stops, 5 TFLs, 2 quarterback hits, 1 sack, 2 interceptions, 7 pass deflections, 4 forced fumbles, and a 97.5 passer rating allowed. And I read that, and I said, wow. Then I thought, didn't Fred Warner play the last 10 games or 8 games with a fractured ankle? All that to say, all those stats to say, Fred Warner is a heck of a linebacker. On his worst day, he's a top 5 linebacker in football. On a broken ankle, he's one of the best linebackers in football still. He's a guy you have to have in your building, a guy you need to keep around, and a guy that is so well respected, where I've been saying this for a long time. I've been doing this podcast for about 5 years now on a variety of different platforms. And I've said since the beginning, Fred Warner is a Shanahan scheme's, really any quarterback's worst nightmare, because he erases the middle of the football field better than anybody. And it's backed up by data. You want Fred Warner on your defense because he minimizes the field. He takes away one of the most important areas of a quarterback's ability to win. In between the numbers, that is where Fred Warner wreaks havoc. He takes away tight ends. He takes away wide receivers. Fred Warner is simply one of the best erasers of the middle of the field in the NFL. You ask any quarterback, any offensive coordinator, if there's one linebacker they don't want to play, his name is Fred Warner. He makes a quarterback's life hell. You are not going to be able to throw in between the numbers from 8 to 10 yards out. And on top of that, I'm not sure if it was the playoff game against Dallas in 2022 or the game where they won 42 to 10 against Dallas at home early in 2023. But Fred isn't just your prototypical linebacker that can cover tight ends and maybe a bigger name receiver or a bigger body receiver. We saw Fred Warner going step for step, yard for yard with CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. He essentially is not just one of the best coverage linebackers. This dude at some points at time in his career has been locking up NFL All-Pro, Pro Bowl wide receivers, not just in the box. We're talking deep downfield, along the seams, in pivotal matchups, pivotal playoff games. He always comes to play. There's never a game where Fred, you say, wow, that wasn't a great game. Fred's great games are just, those are tape. Those are film examples to watch. Those are things you want to put on tape for young players. However, his worst games are games you say, wow, that wasn't a great game for Fred, but he still is tremendous. He still is one of the best linebackers in football. And it's so important to have that guy next to Nicholas Martin and D. Winters in your room for the next 5 years. You have no idea if you're going to have Saleh for 1 or 2 years. Fred needs to be that constant presence in your room, whether it is Saleh or Gus Bradley next year, or whoever it may be in a couple of years' time. Having the holdovers, having the carryovers, having that consistent presence in your room for young players. And I think about this. They brought in Alfred Collins, C.J. West, Micah Williams, Nicholas Martin, second-year players. Tatum Bethune is still there at the linebacker position. Upton Stout, Marquise Siegel. You brought in so many other young players to play pivotal roles for you. They're going to look to a guy like Fred Warner to lead by example, set the tone. And I think about this, OTAs and training camp are coming up, right, for this team. And I've been there to practices when nobody else is allowed to be there. I've been there for the only media practices there are. I've been there when there's no fans there. The consistent, always constant presence you see is Fred Warner getting in guys' face, setting a tone, and in a very serious, you got to start things off right year for San Francisco, where you were 6-11 last year. You are in the window now to win, right? You want to capitalize on this window. Fred's going to be out there day one, pushing younger players to be better, pushing veteran guys to say, hey, you may think you're going 100%. I'm going to show you you're only going 75%. I'm going to show you what winning 49er football looks like, and having that guy in your building, in your huddle, day in, day out matters so much. He essentially is the George Kittle to the defense. He is that high motor, always yelling, always screaming, on the sideline guy, where you talk about culture establishing players. Fred Warner is that. George Kittle is that. Brock Purdy, to a certain extent, although hasn't been there since the beginning, is that for this regime. I love this deal. You don't mind paying linebackers premium money when they play like Fred Warner. He is this era's Patrick Willis. He is, the face of this Niners defense, probably even more so than Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa is a great defensive player of the year. We're talking about, Fred Warner being all pro every single year, being in that DPOY conversation, despite being a linebacker, which rarely ever happens. It's usually your edge rushers, guys that change the game up front. Fred becomes that on a game-by-game basis. It's a guy that can change a game on a whim. You can go all the way back to 2019 against Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. He's getting interceptions from day one. He's changing games all the time. And when you want to rely on somebody to make a big play for you, it's Fred Warner. It's a great deal for San Francisco. Happy for Fred. Get him locked up. Make him a Niner for life. Those things matter. And I think one of the more important pieces of this, and it's tied into the George Kittle and Brock Purdy extensions, is a lot of people want to push back and say, oh, they don't have the money. Oh, they're going to be hamstrung. Oh, they can't do this. They can't sign that guy. If anything, them paying Kittle and Warner in the exact same offseason in which they paid Brock Purdy proves the exact opposite. Now, We don't know exactly what this deal looks like for Fred. All we know is it's 3 more years for about $21 million per year. However, with the assumption that Brock Purdy's deal is likely not going to kick in until about year 2 of it, so not this year or next year, but in 2 years' time, Fred walked into this year with a $29.174 million cap hit. 10.45% of the cap was going to Fred Warner. And next year, it was a $26.7 million cap hit with about 8.7% of the cap going to him. You have to assume that's going to be a much lower number once we get the actual contract in our hands. You can see how it's broken down. And when you add that into this team already having roughly $40 million to spend right now without the Purdy contract on the books and without knowing Fred's new deal and the exact values of it, they're probably going to have about $45 to $50 million more to spend this offseason. And the assumption was, and they're probably going to want to carry that over into next year, meaning that they're going to have money to, one, be active if they're winning at the trade deadline, but also, two, next offseason, they don't have to be timid and be coy. They have 3 of their pillars signed to contracts. They don't really have anybody else of big money value to worry about on the roster now. But my mind thinks of, what about when Colton McKivitz is gone or is going to be a free agent next offseason? What happens when Trent Williams inches closer to retirement, if not is already there after this year? They now have the ammunition financially and draft pick wise to make a trade for a player, to be aggressive and acquire a player. So I think, again, I want to continually push back on the idea that, oh, San Francisco's cooked and they're done, and they simply cannot get it done when it comes to adding players. The roster is going to be, restricted. That's all false. Now, they may have to be more, I guess you can say, be smarter as to how much they spend and who they spend it on. But you look at who they let go this year and who they brought back. They let go guys that may have or may not have been real assets. Hufanga was hit or miss a lot. Greenlaw was a great player, but the injury history was really there, and you didn't want to bank on him being healthy for a full year, which has already shown to be the case out there in Denver. He's already hurt again. But you look at bringing back Kittle, bringing back Fred Warner, just no-brainer moves where you say, those are guys you want to pay. And I told you this when Brock Purdy signed. San Francisco, Jed York and Parag Marate were never going to not pay players. They just wanted to pay the right players. And paying Kittle and Brock Purdy and Fred Warner is paying the right players. And usually those moves pay off for you in the long run. And when I think about this window of time, right, I believe you now have Brock Purdy, George Kittle, and Fred Warner, while not in their exact contracts, you now have 4 years of all those guys together. You're essentially telling the fan base, the team, like, hey, we got 4 years of prime Brock, prime Kittle, and prime Fred Warner, and there may be 1 or 2 years of carryover there with Fred and Brock, but you're getting 4 years of these guys on your roster. They are dictating to us, this is the window. We're not going to sit back and be nonchalant. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to try to be competitive, and we view this as a win now move. Now, a lot of that is banking on young guys stepping up, but when you have Fred Warner and Kittle and Brock Purdy in your building under contract, it makes those guys stepping up a lesser of a need, but also it makes it a lot easier for younger guys to step up, knowing that they don't have to be a Mike linebacker and a green dot player from day one. They don't have to be a franchise quarterback or a star tight end on day one. This gives younger players some time to grow into their roles, play kind of ancillary outside pieces, and be kind of an accessory rather than a major part of the defense. I think of Nicholas Martin, right? A player that a lot of people like, I like myself, but the expectations shouldn't be too high. But now that you know he can become your third linebacker in year one and can grow into a number 2 linebacker in year 2 or towards the end of this year, that makes you a heck of a lot more comfortable knowing that he's playing next to Fred to pick up the pieces when he messes up as a young player. That's really important to have. And also to mentor those guys. Like, look, I've seen it all. I've done it all. I've been to 2 Super Bowls. I've broken my heart. I know what it takes to win and what's the reasons why we lost. Here's what we need from you. Those things matter so much when you're looking at kind of like a retooling or kind of a culture change, if you will, with the influx of young talent. Those things really, really matter. And signing Fred is awesome. One quick note here: Deebo Samuel, who's been off of San Francisco's roster for, I don't know, the last 3 months or so, 4 months or so, continues to be one of the biggest proponents of his former teammates. He put on Instagram today, "Yes, sir. Money Man 54. Congrats, my brother. Well deserved. Keep stepping and being you all love." I don't think San Francisco will play the Commanders this year, barring a playoff run for both teams. But Debo and Fred have had those battles in camp. I've seen them live. Ayuk and Fred have had those battles in camp. I've seen them live. There is nobody else on that defense like Fred Warner. And you're having former All-Pros hype up the move. And look, all Niner fans really should have no complaints about this. There is nothing negative you can find. That Fred doesn't miss time. I think Fred's only missed 1 game maybe in his entire career. It's been a very low amount, if any at all. So it's a great deal. The durability is there. The play on the field's there, and the culture impacting is certainly there for somebody like Fred Warner. But we have a comment here in the YouTube chat saying, "Extend Jake Brendel now." If you did that, although I think Jake's under contract for the next 2 or 3 years, man, you would get a riot out there at Niners HQ, where if in the same offseason you extended Purdy, Warner, and Kittle, and also Jake Brendel, you have a major problem on your hands if you are Kyle and John. For all the good they've done, it would get washed away by extending Jake Brendel for even 1 more year. But which funny enough would actually be kind of, on par for them. But I love this move. It's hard to hate it. Fred's the best coverage linebacker in football. I think there's a big reason as to why you saw some growth from D. Winters as a coverage player in year 2. His name is Fred Warner. May not be the only reason, but Fred is just so different than every other linebacker in football. He plays different. He's a better coverage player than Zach Bond, than Roquan Smith. And, Roquan's kind of a throwback linebacker to me. Fred is that new age linebacker. And for anybody balking at the idea of paying Fred when he's 33, 34, linebackers can play a lot longer now. While, yes, they are very physical, beings, and it's a very physical position, the way Fred plays linebacker isn't going to wear and tear on his body like, say, Ray Lewis played, or the way Patrick Willis played linebacker. Warner can probably play until he's 34 years old now. You may see some speed decreases and maybe his body eventually slow down, but you're probably getting a very, very, very good, if not great, Fred Warner for the rest of that contract. I'm not sure if it goes more beyond that, but you have to pay great players in their prime. And San Francisco did that 3 times this offseason, which thankfully is drama-free, right? That's one of the biggest things about this is it's a drama-free offseason. Again, 3 days after Brock Purdy signs his big deal, so does Fred. I was a little shocked they did this so soon, mainly because Fred had 2 years on his deal. But again, from a financial standpoint, getting that $29 million cap hit down is a big deal for this team to save money eventually and, kick that can down the road, but also give them a bigger and brighter window to kind of get some bigger talent in to help, capitalize on this window they're currently in. So love this deal. Fred's awesome. Eraser of the middle of the field. He's going to make Stafford and Kyler Murray and Sam Darnold's life hell for the next 5 years now with San Francisco. He also he's a mismatch for defense. He's an X factor. You don't find those guys very often. And it's funny enough, the 3 guys they've signed this offseason were a 3rd round pick being Fred, a 5th round pick being Kittle, and a 7th round pick being Brock Purdy. If you'd have told anybody starting in 2017, those three guys and those three draft positions would be your superstars, your pillars of your team and your franchise for the next half decade, we all would have laughed and said, no way. But fast forward almost 8 years now, and we're all sitting back like, maybe San Francisco should just try to get every third round pick and fifth round pick and seventh round pick when it's all said and done, because those are kind of aces for them, where for all the misses they've had in the first round and second round, when you hit on guys like Fred Kittle and Purdy, while it doesn't erase those misses, it certainly makes those ones easier to swallow. And now you add in 11 draft picks this year. I know San Francisco, the projections may not be very high for them, but it's really hard to not call this offseason a win. Now, again, go out there and play and prove it to us and win 11, 12 games and be in the playoffs and make some noise. But from a off-season zoomed out standpoint, you can grade the draft class how you want, but when you talk about signing three of your biggest players in the course of 2 months or so, that's a big win compared to what it was usually like, where all three of these guys are likely negotiating contracts during training camp and preseason the last couple of years. To get out of that and avoid that is such a big deal for this team, to have no distractions now. Like, they literally have nobody else to sign. Nobody else, to where they've set themselves up where if they want to negotiate an extension for, say, Juwan Jennings, they can, and not have it be that big of a deal, to have it kind of be a quieter thing. If they want to talk to, Trent Williams about, redoing his deal again to kind of free up some money, that can happen and it not be a thing. Or even in a weird way, extending Colton McKivitz for one more year. Like, none of those guys, none of those contracts are going to be a distraction to, take away from what this year should be for them, which should be all out football compared to what the last couple of years have been, where it's like, if it's a big pie, 75% goes to football, but 25% of the offseason goes to contract talks, renegotiations. That's done. And I can't think of the last time San Francisco has gotten three of their big contracts done before May 20th. Like, that's a massive thing for this franchise and for this team in a very pivotal year for the organization and regime. But with that said, tell me down below in the comments, do you love the deal? Do you hate the deal? How happy are you to have Fred Warner back under contract for the next 5 years on a 3-year, $63 million extension with the San Francisco 49ers? And you can also follow us on social media at 49ers.access is the Instagram, 49ers_access is the X and Twitter. The next thing I want to talk about here is another contract extension they already signed, that being Brock Purdy, but some more details have surfaced as to what is actually involved in the deal while we're waiting for the full kind of contract breakdown, the guarantees, the full guarantees, total guarantees, what the year-to-year looks like. We did get confirmation via Mike Garafolo of NFL Network that Brock Purdy is getting a full no trade clause, which essentially means San Francisco believes so much in Brock Purdy, they are willing to relinquish potential and out via a trade in order to retain him for the next 5 to 6 seasons now, once his extension hits the books next year. And that's a really important note to make. While it's not uncommon for a franchise quarterback to get that, let's make that very clear here. This is nothing new for quarterbacks in the NFL once they get paid big. However, for a team that is in a window now and they want to win, and a head coach and GM that have been so open about being tied to Brock Purdy their entire career, or the remainder of their career in San Francisco, they are reconfirming that again. Now, paying Brock 5 years already does that, but saying we are giving ourselves really no outs to get out of the deal is a big kind of symbol as of the hope and the belief they have in Brock, where they are relinquishing those trade rights to, like, if Brock sucks, you're either eating a massive dead cap hit via release, or Brock has to waive that no trade clause. And that's a pretty big deal. And to already get Brock under market value via a $53 million a year contract, to also essentially saying, we'll trade you this kind of security via being on the team with a no trade clause to lower your cap hit. That is a good deal on both sides. It continues to prove why this deal is a win-win for both. Now, obviously, Brock has to play pretty great to maximize that contract, but ultimately, to have a no trade clause involved is a big deal for them and a big deal for him. But also, it really does prove to everybody out there who maybe is not sold on Brock just yet that Kyle is willing to put his job on the line even further to make sure Brock is the quarterback here. Like Shanahan essentially said, I am putting my foot down. This is my quarterback. If he doesn't play well, I'm out of town. That's a pretty big statement to make, I think, for a regime that I don't want to say is already on rocky waters, but has lost 2 Super Bowls. Prague and Jed York really kind of got in their ear and said, look, we have to change some things this offseason, and the financial situation-wise isn't looking great. Let's cut some players away and let's alter how we do things defensively, and let's give Robert Saleh a lot of control in the draft to do that. And in the same offseason, tell Brock Purdy no trade clause, yes, guaranteed. We agree to that is a massive thing, at least to me. And it also shows that, this team is unafraid to, really, they're unafraid to be kind of ballsy and risky. Like a lot of people out there don't believe in Brock. A lot of the fan base doesn't believe in Brock. And some pundits don't believe in Brock. They've known Brock was the guy for about 4 years now, back in training camp when they had Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo and even Nate Sudfeld there in the building. This is them, again, tying themselves to Brock and whatnot. But I think it also shows the confidence they have in him where, yeah, it may be kind of like a no duh, like this has to happen. But to give a player a no trade clause, like you really got to trust in him. And they don't really, like, Brock had every right to ask for $60 million a year, which he didn't do for all we know. But San Francisco had every right to reserve the right to trade Brock if he wasn't going to be good. And they didn't do that. Like, they're willing to eat that dead cap hit if he's not good for them in the next, 3 years or so, where they can really kind of say, hey, this didn't work out for us and it backfired. Which I think it's important to note. Like, it's not the biggest thing in the world. It isn't like, oh my God, it's a big revelation, but I think it is important to note for a team that is going into a really serious and big season for them that they're like, hey, we are locked and loaded where you're our guy. And if you fail, so do we. That's a big vote of confidence for Brock Purdy after coming off of one of the worst years, if not the worst year of his career by far. To give him that, to me, is really important. But does it mean much to you? Mean much to me? No, but worth noting as we progress into the OTA period of the off season. The next kind of point of note to make isn't from a contract extension standpoint of Fred or Kittle or Purdy, but comes in the way of Jake Moody's future. And before we dive into that, I want to let you know MLB is in full swing. The NBA playoffs are still alive and kicking. The WNBA just kicked off a couple days ago, and the NFL is approaching very, very soon. The schedule's already out. If you want to pre-order your tickets, go ahead and do that at SeatGeek.com and use our promo code 49ersaccess, 49 ERS-ACCESS at SeatGeek.com. You can save yourself $20 off your first purchase. Again, 49 ERS-ACCESS at SeatGeek.com and save yourself $20 off your first purchase. Okay, the San Francisco 49ers today officially signed kicker Greg Joseph to a 1-year deal and waived Alex Barrett, defensive lineman. And with that news, a lot of people are talking about this is the end for Jake Moody. Now, do I think Greg Joseph can beat or will beat Jake Moody out for the starting kicker position or job? I don't. I think San Francisco was utilizing Greg Joseph, who, mind you, was the best kicker on the open market, to hopefully push Jake Moody into being a better kicker this season. Now, if Jake Moody, let's say he gets 9 field goal attempts during the preseason, where Moody is a great practice kicker. I've been there. I've seen him make 70-yard field goals in practice. It's impressive. However, when the lights come on, it's like he's a deer in the headlights and has no idea what's going on out there at Levi Stadium or on the road. With that in mind, if Jake, to me, gets 3 field goal attempts per game against the Broncos, Raiders, and Chargers this preseason, and he goes 7 for 9, they're going to keep him. But if he goes 6 for 9 and Greg Joseph looks competent over his career, is relatively more consistent than Jake, I think that is a door open to Greg Joseph beating out Jake Moody for the kicker job in San Francisco. Now, there is one connection with Brant Boyer and Greg Joseph. Greg Joseph made 1 kick attempt last year for the New York Jets, and he was 1 for 1. So it's a small tidbit, but again, worth noting that Brant Boyer has had some connection to Greg Joseph as early as last year with the Jets. And looking at their stats in comparison, Jake Moody last year was terrible. But if you want to go back to his rookie season, he was 60 for 61 on extra points, and he only missed 4 field goal attempts his rookie year in 2023. Now, that's not great. He missed 1 from 50 yards out. He missed 1 or 2 from 40 yards out and 1 from 30 yards out. I think one of those came on the last game of the season against the Rams that year where all the bench players were playing. So I think what you wanted that. He also had a kick blocked in the Super Bowl. Then after having a okay rookie season, the expectation was Jake becomes, a better kicker in year 2. However, he cratered last year. You can certainly make an argument that the ankle injury cost him some. I would agree with that. However, Jake Moody was 24 for 34 last year. His field goal percentage dropped from 84% to 70.6%. That's really bad. He was one of the worst, if not the worst kicker in football last year when it comes to full-time kickers. He was terrible. Whereas Greg Joseph, who has played 6 years in the NFL, starting in 2018, he was 25 for 29 on extra points and 17 for 20, so 86% on extra points and 85% on field goals. And over his career, had a really good 3-year stint in Minnesota, wasn't brought back last year and played for 3 teams, the Giants, the Commanders, and the Jets. And over his career, had an 82.3% field goal percentage. Now, the one point I've always made about Jake Moody is it doesn't matter where you draft a kicker, whether it's round 7, a UDFA, or the 3rd round. If they are consistent in making game-winning clutch kicks in the playoffs, who cares? It's well worth it. Now, in retrospect for Jake Moody, you wouldn't do that, right? Obviously, most teams wouldn't do that in retrospect. On top of that, San Francisco probably wouldn't do that in retrospect as well. But I've always said, as long as you're making game-winning kicks in clutch moments and in playoff games, Jake Moody's worth that pick. Now, when he's not doing that and he's not making kicks really in any game possible, cost you a handful of games last year, tried to give away the Buccaneers game last year, which, yikes, how do you miss 3 kicks back-to-back-to-back? You now open the door for Greg Joseph, where although Joseph doesn't have this booming leg that Jake does, where Jake will be better from 50 yards out, Joseph is more consistent from 30 yards out. You're not going to have the main reason why they drafted Jake in the first place. 1, a luxury pick, but 2, they wanted to shorten that field for the offense to make the offense have to travel less yardage to at least score 3 points. However, when Jake ain't doing that, I don't care. He can make a 56-yard field goal, albeit inconsistently. I'd rather have the guy that can score from inside the 40 and get me 3 points when drives stall, either in the red zone or just outside of it, where Jake is having a really hard time doing that on a consistent basis. So if it's me and I'm San Francisco, although I don't think I'd rather have Jake Moody find himself and be a darn good kicker. Maybe it will be the new long snapper coming in and changing things. I have no idea, right? Maybe it is Brant Boyer changing something. However, if they can get Jake Moody right, there's a good kicker in Jake somewhere. I always said, when Jake's making kicks, he's a good kicker. The issue is he's not always making kicks. He's not always making the kicks. But I'd rather have Greg Joseph over his career, right? From inside the 30, be 37, or inside the 40, excuse me, be 37 for 38, compared to Jake, who from inside the 40 is, 13 for 14, but outside the 40 is 10 for 7, or 10 for 17, excuse me. And Greg, outside the 40, is 27 for 38. Like, they're very similar players, but I'd rather have a more consistent kicker inside the 40 compared to outside the 50. Like, I don't want, this team stalled too many times in the red zone last year. And you hope that Jake can find something on the offense, can score some more touchdowns. But if they can't, I can't have Jake Moody against the Rams in week 10 being like, I hope this works. You have to trust the guy you trot out there in must-win games. And San Francisco, to begin this year, has 3 must-win games in the first 5 weeks: Seahawks, Cardinals, and Rams. If Jake is the reason you lose 2 of those games, you can't keep him. And with that, I will end by saying this. I think San Francisco would be extremely wise to make sure, whether it's Greg Joseph or a different kicker, be on their practice squad on a consistent basis. I don't care what Jake's confidence level's at. I don't care what Moody thinks about that. He has proven nothing to this team, and I'm hoping they can see past their stubbornness to say, hey, look, we may have made a mistake. Let's just make sure there's a backup option on the roster, because we cannot go in week 5, week 6, week 7, week 10, week 15, week 17, maybe a playoff game with a guy you can't trust outside of the 40-yard line. That cannot happen. I don't know if Greg Joseph is that guy, but by signing Greg Joseph and not Andres Borregales from Miami during the draft or somebody else, they essentially have said, we're bringing in a vet that is more accomplished and equally as consistent as you, Jake. Watch out. He's coming for your job. But tell me down below, do you think Greg Joseph will replace Jake Moody this offseason? Obviously, OTAs, training camp, and preseason will dictate that, but I do think Jake Moody is this team's kicker on day 1. But Greg Joseph may have a leg in to winning that competition. Time will obviously tell. And again, do you like Brock Purdy having a no-trade clause? Do you dislike that? Do you rather have San Francisco have some trade rights over his head, some negotiation power, if you will, if he doesn't become the player they think he will be in the future under his contract extension? And Fred Warner gets a brand new deal, 3 years, $63 million, likely giving San Francisco an easier cap hit and hopefully freeing up some money for them to be able to keep this window alive, well, and open to hopefully maximize and eventually, please God, eventually raise a Lombardi trophy in San Francisco for the first time since the 1994-1995 season, 30 years ago. It's time to change that, and re-signing Purdy, Kittle, and Fred Warner in the exact same offseason can hopefully do that for this team. But don't forget to leave a like, share, subscribe. Leave us that 5-star audio podcasting review and follow us on social media at 49ers.access is the Instagram, 49ers_access is the X or Twitter, and use that promo code 49ersaccess, 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com to save yourself $20 off your first purchase. As always, my name is Sterling Bennett, and stay faithful.